Luke's gospel, it shares the fact that Joseph of Arimathea, who was one of the ruling class, one of the Sanhedrin, came to Pilate and asked him for the body of the Lord, to place him in a tomb, to prepare his body. And it was once said that someone asked Joseph of Arimathea, they said, that was a great tomb. Why did you give it to someone else to be buried in? He's not part of your family. Oh, said Joseph, he only needed it for the weekend. Jesus said, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again. See, on Friday, the disciples, the women and the others who followed Jesus, they didn't understand. They didn't understand why they had been chosen by Jesus if his mission was to fail. Because you see, they still saw his mission as restoring the kingdom of Israel, to take out the Romans. And Jesus was now dead, and Joseph of Arimathea had laid him in the tomb that he had made for his own family. It was a brand new tomb. Nobody had been laid in it before. Joseph, however, did not have the time to complete the preparation of Jesus' body, because the Sabbath was about to begin. And see, we may not observe the Sabbath today as historically Jews did, because they had so many rules and regulations in place. They could only walk so far. They could only go so far. And they could do no work, which meant that they had to prepare everything the day before so that nothing was done the day of. And so the body could not be prepared in the proper way. So it was placed in the tomb. However, the ladies went home and they prepared the needed spices. They prepared the perfumes, but they had to take the day to rest. And I'm sure it was a restless day. Have you ever had a restless day before? Maybe a restless night where you've been up 2 or 3 times. I've got this great thing that I'm actually not wearing right now. It's called a Fitbit. And it actually tracks my sleeps and tells me how many times I've been awake through the night. And sometimes I get this big red line in it. That means that I got up, probably went to the bathroom or something, and came back. And some nights, 21, 25 times restless, 3 times awake. But there was one night this past week, I slept, I only had two lines in my sleep. And I thought to myself, I slept very well that night. But these ladies, I'm sure this day of rest was not restful at all. I'm sure it was a restless day where the minutes seemed to be hours. And I'm sure that Saturday was one of the longest days that these ladies had ever spent. But it says in Luke chapter 24, verse 1, it says, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. Now, they're expecting the stone to be still there. And they're wondering to themselves, how are we going to move this stone out of the way? They might even actually have thought about the fact that the Romans had placed guards there. They had sealed the tomb so that nobody would tamper with it. So they might have been thinking to themselves, maybe we could get the guards to roll the stone out of the way so that we could finish the preparation. But I can't imagine the reaction they had when they saw that the stone was already rolled away. And to find that when they looked in, that the body wasn't even there. And while they're wondering about this, trying to get their heads wrapped around this, well then it says 2 men appeared in gleaming clothes. Well, we know what that is. They were angels. They had come to share good news. They had come to give them the word, which we find in verses 5 to 6 and 24, where it says, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen. Remember how he told you while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered over to the hands of sinners, be crucified, and on the third day raised again." How many people do we know? How many of us run into people who are looking for God among the dead? Looking for him to be one that is still not risen. People look at the Bible as merely a historical document, not the living Word of God. Some people go to church as if it's a memorial service, but some people don't go at all. But Jesus isn't among the dead. He lives. He reigns in the hearts of Christians, and he is the head of the church. He is the living God. Science says that if there is any such thing as an infallible proof, it is the repetition of the same experiment. You can do the same experiment over and over and get the same results. It says that it's true. Well, Jesus rose from the dead. Mary Magdalene encountered him. Number one. That's the first repetition of the same experiment. The women encountered him. Experiment number two. The disciples encountered him. He came amongst them in a room. The doors were locked and he stood amongst them. Number three. The apostles encountered him. It says that 500 people saw him after the resurrection. He appeared to over 500 people. Experiment number 5. See, each one of these is the repetition of the same experience, the same experiment. They all encountered the same phenomenon. What was it? It was that Jesus was alive. That's what changed the history of the world. That's what changed everything. Made things new. Do we look for Jesus among the living? Do we expect to see him active in the world and in the church? I want you to do something for me. I want you to look for signs of his power. I want you to look for signs of his grace, of his mercy. They're all around us. They are everywhere to be seen. I want to show you a picture. It's of a guy by the name of Pastor Yu. So there's me, you know me, and then there's Pastor Yu, and then there's my friend Sean Keogh. This is a young man. He's been married for a year. He's been pastoring a small church, just a little tiny congregation. The church is in one side of this square, and it's got an area where they can play some games and stuff in between. And then there's another building over here. In that building, there's the kitchen and where he and his wife stay. But in behind the church, I went into this room. I was curious. I'm curious. And if I'm curious, I'm going to check it out. And so I went into this room and I looked, and there were 3 beds in there. And I thought to myself, he's only been married for a year. What's going on here? It was bunk beds and another bed. I come to find out that this young man, there was a lady in the community who had 3 children, 3 boys. And her husband left her. She had these 3 boys. She got a boyfriend. She didn't want her boys anymore. She came to the pastor. Said, "Pastor, I don't want my boys anymore. You take them." He said, "What? Really? You're serious? You don't want your boys anymore?" She said, "Nope." She left. and she's never come back. Those 3 boys are now the children of this pastor and wife who've only been married for a year. They also have 3 other children that were given to them as well. So they have 6 kids altogether. Married a year. So here's Pastor Yu pastoring the church, okay? Doing a good job. Compassion International approaches him and asks him if he would be willing to be the principal of a school. They wanted to make a school just down the street from his church so that the kids of the community who are Thai speaking could be taught Chinese. And so he ends up, this is a different world, kind of takes you back to the 70s when you used to be able to drive in the back of a truck. Do you remember that? Anybody remember that? I used to drive in the back of the truck all the time. My dad had a bench seat. It's pretty cold sometimes. But in Thailand, they travel around in the backs of trucks all over the place. That's where, when we were in Chiang Mai, that was our transportation. We got into the back of a truck. It was great because when it's 38 degrees, great breeze like that was good. But Pastor Yu, I got into the truck with him as he went out into the communities to pick up kids. There was bus stops all over the communities, and the kids would just jump in, and they'd look in, and they'd see this Canadian in the back seat, and they'd be, oh, who's that? You know? Didn't know what to make of me. But he just went around, and he picked up all of these kids, brought them to the school. They praised God, and he taught them Chinese. You see, during the day, these kids go to school to learn Thai, but at night, they come to this school to learn Chinese. Think about that. You want to be in school all day? Even into the night, you know, from 7 to 9, they go there to learn Chinese. But Pastor Yu has stepped up. He doesn't have a whole lot of money. There's not a whole lot of resources there. So I was looking around his yard, and I looked up and I saw this. It was a pop bottle with a propeller on the front of it and a little engine on the back. And he collects wind energy to power some of the lights in his house. And then Sean, my friend, he ended up going with him down over the hill. There was a stream down over the hill. He ended up taking this old wash machine engine, okay, and he ended up hooking up to it a bike wheel, and on the bike wheel he attached bowls, okay, just regular old bowls. Anyway, he's got it in a stream to generate power, to be able to help provide power for these kids, to be able to, you know, make ends meet. Pastor Yu he inspired me. That he was so ingenious, you know, and he was talking about how he wanted to reach out into this community and share Christ with these people over here. And you see, this country is mostly Buddhist. But there's one thing that's amazing that I heard while I was there. The government loves Christians. There's these checkpoints all over the country. The police are there. They've got AK whatevers sitting there with their machine guns and what they're looking, you know, the checkpoints. But we came into these checkpoints with a bus. And on the bus was the Bethel Bible Institute and a cross. Keep going, you know. Didn't stop, didn't check our ID, nothing like that, because they know that Christians are honest. They know that Christians are transforming their communities and looking after people and looking after the needs of the communities. I asked you the question, do you look for Jesus among the living? Do you expect to see him active in the world? I saw him active in the world there. I see him active in the world here. You know, there are so many ways in which we impact the lives around us. Sometimes it's a smile. Sometimes it's a kind word. Sometimes it is a handout. But sometimes it's just being good to those who are around us, to be able to share the good news, to use words if necessary. There was a little boy by the name of Jeremy. Jeremy was born with a twisted body, and he was slow of mind. And at the age of 12, he was still in second grade. Do you get the math there? It seemed that he was unable to learn, and his teacher, a lady by the name of Doris Miller, often became just exasperated with him. He would squirm in his seat, he would drool, he would make grunting noises, and at other times he spoke clearly and distinctly, as if a spot of light had penetrated the darkness of his brain. Most of the time, however, Jeremy just irritated his teacher. One day she called his parents and asked if they could come in for a consultation. And as the Foresters entered the empty classroom, Doris said to them, "Jeremy really belongs in a different school." Doris said, "It isn't fair to be with the younger children who don't have learning problems. Why there's a 5-year-old gap between them in age." And Mrs. Forrester, she started to cry. This was a different world. This was a while ago. She started to cry into her tissue, and while her husband spoke, he said, "Miss Miller, there is no school of that kind nearby. It'd be a terrible shock if Jeremy was taken out of this school. We know he really likes it here." Doris sat for a long time after they had left and stared at the snow outside the window. Its coldness seemed to seep into her soul. She wanted to sympathize with the Foresters. After all, their only child, he is terminally ill. But she still didn't think it was fair to keep him in her class. She had 18 other children. Jeremy was a distraction. Furthermore, he would never learn to read and write. Why waste any more time? As she pondered the situation, guilt suddenly washed over her. And she says, "Here I am complaining when my problems are nothing compared to that poor family." She thought, "Lord, please help me to be more patient with Jeremy." And from that day on, she tried hard to ignore Jeremy's noises and his blank stares. And then one day, he limped to her desk, dragging his bad leg behind him, and he says, "I love you, Mrs. Miller." It was loud enough for the whole class to hear. The other students snickered, and Doris's face turned red, and then she kind of stuttered a little bit. "Why, that's very nice, Jeremy. Now, please take your seat." Spring came, and the children talked excitedly about Easter. It's coming. Doris told them the story of Jesus, and then, to emphasize the idea of new life springing forth, she gave each one of the children a large plastic egg. And she said, "I want you to take this home and bring it back tomorrow with something inside that shows new life. Do you understand?" "Yes, Mrs. Miller," they all said. They were excited to be able to find something to show. Every kid loves show and tell. All except for Jeremy. She saw him listening intently. His eyes never left her face. He did not even make his usual noises. Did he understand? Did he understand what she had said about Jesus' death and resurrection? Did he understand the assignment? Perhaps she should call his parents and explain the project to them. Well, that evening, Doris, her kitchen sink stopped up. She called her landlord, waited for an hour for him to come by and unclog it. After that, she had to stop and go and get some groceries. She had to iron her blouse. She had to prepare the vocabulary test for the next day. She completely forgot all about phoning Jeremy's parents. The next morning, 19 children came to school, laughing and talking as they placed their eggs in a large wicker basket on Mrs. Miller's desk. After they completed their math lesson, it was time to open the eggs. In the first egg, Doris found a flower. "Oh, yes, a flower. That's certainly a sign of new life," she said. "When plants peek through the ground, we know that spring's here." A small girl in the first row waved her arm. "That's my egg, Mrs. Miller." The next egg contained a plastic butterfly, which looked very real. And Doris held it up and she said, "We all know that a caterpillar changes and grows into a beautiful butterfly. Yes, that's new life, too." Little Judy smiled proudly and said, "Miss Miller, that's one's mine." Next, Doris found a rock with moss on it. She explained that moss, too, showed life. Billy spoke up from the back class. "Dad, help me with that one." Then Doris opened the fourth egg. The egg was empty. Surely it must have been Jeremy's, she thought. And of course, well, he didn't understand the instructions. If only she had not forgotten to call his parents. But she didn't want to embarrass him, so she quietly set the egg aside and reached for another. And suddenly Jeremy spoke up and he said, "Miss Miller, aren't you going to talk about my egg?" Well, she was kind of flustered and she said, But Jeremy, your egg is empty." And he looked into her eyes and he said softly, "Yes, but Jesus' tomb was empty too, wasn't it?" Time stopped. When she could speak again, Doris asked him, "Do you know why the tomb was empty?" "Oh, yes," Jeremy said. "Jesus was killed and put in there. Then his father raised him up." The recess bell rang, and while the children ran out, excited to go into the schoolyard to play, Doris stayed there and cried. The cold inside her melted completely away. 3 months later, Jeremy died. Those who paid their respects at the graveside were surprised to see 19 eggs on top of his casket, all of them empty. Do you look for Jesus among the living? Do you expect to see him active in the world today and in the church? I want to encourage you this week to look for signs of his power, look for signs of his presence, look for signs of his working, because they're all around us. All around us. Let's pray together.